Okay, it is time to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to be discussing a common question that I hear from many new teachers, and that is about teaching the American accent if you have an accent. And I'm talking about uh, teachers who English is not their first language, so they have an accent from their native language or native region, but also teachers who are native speakers of English, grew up in America, and have some sort of a regional dialect, because this is something that we need to think about as well. So the question is, if you have an accent or a dialect, can you still be an effective teacher when teaching the American accent? So that's what we are discussing today. And just so you don't have to wait too long, the short answer to the question is yes, of course you can. But today we're going to explore some common concerns about teaching with an accent. We'll talk about some strategies to address those concerns. We'll talk about turning your accent into a strength, and then I will offer you some tips for becoming a more effective teacher despite not having a perfect, neutral, general, standard American accent, whatever you want to call it. We all have some sort of accent, so we can all benefit from taking a really honest look at the way we sound and doing everything we can to be the most effective teachers for our students. Okay, today I'm going to try to explain this the best I can, but if you have questions, you can let me know. So, for simplicity today, I'll be using the term American accent to describe everything that we're talking about. But this is just to keep things simple. I know that many of you in this program are British or Australian, or live somewhere else, or speak some other language, and you're teaching the general or neutral accent from the region where you're living, England or Australia or Ireland, wherever that is. So I'm not going to mention the British accent, the English accent, the Australian accent, the Southern dialect. I'm not going to say that every time I bring up a point in this presentation, because it would take forever. So I want you to know that today, during this presentation, when I say American accent, what I'm talking about would apply to any accent that you're teaching, any region where you're living, any possible accent that you would want to teach a student. I just can't list every accent that's possible during the discussion today. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to say American accent, but what I say is going to apply to any accent. Okay. There are places where I do say accent or dialect, but just so we're on the same page. And I think it'll be more clear as we jump into it. So that's what I'm going to do. All right. Any questions before we get started? Okay, here we go. So, as teachers, many of us, myself included, at one time, may feel uncertain about teaching the American accent when we have a non American accent or regional pronunciation or a dialect ourselves. And I say myself included because I was actually required to lose my Western Pennsylvania, Southwestern Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh accent and learn to use what at the time was called the standard American accent. So I had to learn, it was called the standard American accent. So that's what I'm going to call it. That's what I learned before I could begin working with students at the Sam Schwa Speech Center, which is a mouthful in and of itself. It was previously called New York Speech Improvement Services. The director, his name was Sam Schwa, and it was later changed to the Sam Schwa Speech Center. That's where I started my career. So Sam was the director, and he believed that the teachers at his center needed to sound completely neutral and completely generalized in order to provide accent training services for other people. And I don't disagree with his decision. I don't think he was wrong based on the way speech patterns were perceived at that time. So this was 25 years ago. It was the year 2000, back in 2000. At that time, I think that was the right approach. And I think you did have to sound pretty perfect for the time or very neutral and what was called the standard American accent of that time, of the year 2000. But times have changed. Thankfully, times have changed. This is a good thing. People are much more accustomed to and open to different accents, dialects, and speech patterns. You can see this in our everyday life, but you can also see a real shift in the media, in news reporters having more a larger variety of regional accents and dialects. And I'm not just talking about America, I'm talking about all over the world. Even TV, movies, there are a lot more ethnicities and languages and accents represented. And this is a wonderful thing. We should be really glad that this is happening. So people are much more open to different sounds when speaking English or any language, and it is a good thing. But let's take a look at some common concerns that you might have about teaching accents with an accent, if you have an accent yourself. These are the two most common concerns that I hear from teachers. The first one is that students may prefer native speakers with native sounding accents. And I get that. And there are some students like that. You will run into students who hear your accent and decide that they don't want to work with you based on your accent. It totally happens. I'm not going to lie. But it's not every student, because the reality is there are many students out there that are open to learning from non-native teachers because they can relate to their struggles. And non-native speaking or people with teachers with an accent or dialect can provide some valuable insights to these students. I've truly seen this happen. So in today's world, many students are not necessarily looking for a teacher who's a native speaker or who sounds like they've been trained in the general American accent. I feel like most people don't even know what the general American accent is. Part of me doesn't even know if that accent even exists anymore. But that's a lesson for another day. Now, some students do. They want that perfect, in their mind, perfect neutral sounding American accent. But in many cases, I have seen or I've talked to students who are speakers of a certain whatever language background, and they actually prefer to work with the speaker of that native language, of their own native language, because they believe that someone who speaks their native language will understand their specific speech and pronunciation challenges. They know the language, they know how hard it can be to speak in English coming from that specific native language, and they want a teacher who can relate. So I've had students who have chosen other teachers over me because they wanted someone from their specific native language. And we're going to talk about marketing in just a minute, but I'm sure you can understand how choosing the right target audience for you could really help. And if you do speak if you have a native language that's different than English, working with speakers from that language background is a really good idea, especially when you're just starting out. But we'll talk about that more in a moment. Am I going to the second common challenge? Hold on one second. Oh, yeah. So I have a note here to talk about the trust and bond and the relationship. And that's true. So when you come from the same native language background and you're both working on your English, there's a relationship that's pre-built. You don't have to do anything. You have that bond. You have that trust. Plus, you as the teacher are giving the student a really accurate idea of what they can expect as far as progress. So even if your accent is not perfectly American or perfectly whatever you're teaching, the student can hear that it's closer to the goal than theirs. So it gives them a really accurate and attainable idea of what's possible for them, right? So it's different. Someone like me who has a very general American accent. I have had some students say to me, they're kind of discouraged. They'll say, I love the way you sound. That's how I want to sound in English, but you're a native speaker. I will never sound like you, regardless of how much I practice. So what's the point of doing this at all? right? So I'm their goal. They say they'll never sound like me, even with all the practice in the world. But if I had a slight accent and I spoke their native language, it's more to them, it's more like, okay, this is actually possible. I can do this because you did it. You came from my same native language background and you did it. So you are my guide. You are my inspiration. So this can absolutely work to your advantage. But as we will talk about in a moment, it's up to you to present your skills and your language background in a way that the student sees this. It's not up to the student to come to this realization. It's up to you to present that to them in your marketing, if that makes sense. Okay. The second most common concern, fear of judgment or rejection due to the accent or based on the accent. And the reality is that embracing your accent and talking about it openly and honestly can foster a really supportive and inclusive learning environment. And it's true. And I teach the accent of my native language. So I'm not in exactly the same situation as someone who learned English and it's not their first language, but I do understand this one to some extent because I just told you earlier that I had to change my accent in order to work. So it wasn't really my idea at first. But to be honest, I was very happy to do it. I was very happy to lose my old accent because once I realized that I had this accent, which I didn't realize until I moved to New York City when I was 24, I was really self-conscious about it. I Looking back, okay, so a number of things. I didn't like being asked where I was from. I wanted to be where I was living. I wanted to be a New Yorker. I was probably a little embarrassed about where I came from because a small town in southwestern Pennsylvania is in my mind not the most glamorous place to grow up. So I was probably a little embarrassed about that, but that's a story for another day. I didn't like people saying my accent was cute. I really hated people asking where I was from in the South. So a southwestern PA accent does sound a little southern because we do a couple of things, but mainly we chop our I's in half. We do that I thing. So instead of like, I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. There's that kind of twanginess on the I, and it's a shorter vowel. So I understand why people thought I was from the South, but I'm not from the South. And there's nothing wrong with being from the South, but I'm from Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is not the South. So that was really annoying. So there were multiple reasons that I had no problems learning the standard accent of the time so that people would stop knowing more about me than I was ready to reveal. And I'm really glad that I was trained. I was trained by Sam Schwa to speak with a standard American accent. So I was trained by, one of the best in the business. So I understand that feeling of having a reason for changing my accent. And I also know what it's like to go through the process of changing your accent, learning it, practicing it, and using it. So I can share that experience of my experience of accent training. I can share that with my students. And this gives me a unique perspective when working with them. I know how to best support them. I know how to encourage them. I know how to speak to them when they get bored with the practicing. I know how to motivate them to think about the end goal. So while the change in my accent was probably not as drastic as someone who grew up speaking Spanish, I do know what it's like to go through the process of accent training, and I can offer my experience to support my students. And so can you. But again, it's up to us to make sure they understand that we have that unique experience to share with them. All right, good. So I'm telling you to embrace your accent. I didn't really embrace my accent back then, although nowadays maybe I would have made a different decision. I'm not sure how I would have handled it because the view of speech patterns and accents is so different now. But what I can tell you that what I can tell you is that being able to switch in and out of my old accent and my new accent, or switching into a British accent and then back to a standard American accent, the process of accent training, the ability to demonstrate that I can do it, is really motivating for my students. And that brings me to my next point. Everything I've said up until this point is that it's totally fine to have an accent or dialect when you're teaching the American accent or any accent. And that is a true statement. Okay. I want to make sure that that is clear. However, okay, I'm going to read what I wrote because I like the way I wrote it. I wrote, while it's totally fine to speak with an accent or dialect, we are accent specialists and accent instructors who are promising speech changes. How can we expect speech change from our students when we can't demonstrate it for them? Okay. So if we can't demonstrate a change in speech pattern or accent or dialect, why should they trust that they can do it? If the teacher can't do it, why should they believe that they can do it? So I'm not saying that you must sound like a native speaker of any accent that you're teaching, okay? But I am saying that you should be working on it. If you're teaching the American accent, you should be working on your American accent. If you're teaching the general British accent or the general English or the general Australian, you should be working on your general British or general English or general Australian. You should be working on it. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you should be working on it, going through the process so you can share your experiences, your success, and your failures with your students. Okay? If you have access to my instructor practice libraries or the student practice libraries, you have everything you need to learn a standard American accent or a general American accent. Everything is there in those libraries. You can work through those lessons. You can practice with those listen and repeat practice videos yourself. You have the access. So if you're teaching the American accent, you should be in those practice libraries doing the work yourself. And every one of us has some sort of, even the slightest bit of a regional dialect. You could still be changing that to learning that completely neutral, completely generalized, what used to be called, whatever you want to call it, standard American accent. If you are speaking and you haven't trained, you have some sort of dialect or accent. So you should be in those practice libraries doing the work yourself. Okay. And again, you don't have to be perfect with this standard accent or this general American accent at all times, but you should be able to demonstrate every sound and every concept accurately. When you're teaching your student to say TH, you should be able to demonstrate that pronunciation in the general American accent, the way I teach you in those practice libraries. TH maybe isn't, well, TH is a big problem for a lot of you in conversation, and you probably don't know it because you haven't had a speech assessment yourself. The vowel ah, I can tell you that every single one of you should be in those practice libraries learning about the vowel ah, how it changes from dialect to dialect, and being able to demonstrate the difference between can and can, the difference between champagne and champagne, to give your students the choice of how they want to say. I talk about it in the video. So, yeah, and if you have if your accent is further from an American accent, if your native language is something other than English, you should really be in those instructor practice libraries working on your own speech so that you can demonstrate it perfectly for your students. You don't have to be perfect all the time, but you should be able to perfectly demonstrate one word or a short phrase with the American accent, and you should be able to do it effortlessly. If you can't do that, how on earth can you expect it from your students? Okay, so get in there and practice. And if you really need help, I offer private sessions. I'm wonderful at what I do. So if you want a speech session with me, you can schedule that. We can work together. I'm here for you. You need to just let me know. And if I'm too expensive for you, because I am very expensive, I know that. There are other teachers in the teacher directory. If you go to my website, the accent channel, it's the Find a Speech Coach is the web address, but I actually changed it to accent specialist because that's more reflective of what we do. But in my teacher directory, there are teachers who work with students, and you could work with one of them. They are many of them, some of them are you, and you know that you're just starting out or don't have as much experience. So your sessions are a bit cheaper. Honestly, I just had this idea, so I need to think about this. It would be wonderful if you could exchange services with another new teacher. Maybe so give each other sessions. You would be improving your the accent that you're teaching. You'd also be giving each other teaching experience. You could write testimonials for each other. That's actually a really great idea. And yes, note to self, more on that, more to come. That would be amazing. But anyway, until I get around to making it happen for you, contact some of the teachers in the Facebook group. Go to that page, see if there's a teacher who will exchange services for free so that you can both feel more confident in your American accent or whatever the goal accent is. And you can also get some teaching experience. All right, cool. All right. Questions. Let's take a short pause for me to take a drink. All right. I'm working the Yeti today. I don't really like drinking out of it. I usually prefer a glass. It tastes so much better, but I forgot my glass downstairs. Okay, here we go. Now, if you have an accent or a dialect, I do want you to remember that you bring a unique perspective to this work. Okay, you have this unique perspective, but you need to use it as a strength. You need to, and you're the one, I said this earlier, you have to communicate it as a strength to the world, or you need to communicate it to the world as a strength. This is marketing. This is our job. All right. So here's one way to think about it. If you learned English as a second language, or if you have an accent or dialect, you're probably very aware of the sounds and features of English that are challenging for speakers of your native language or accent. And if you're not, you need to get in my practice libraries and figure out which sounds are challenging for your language background, and then you can help other people. But you already understand the personal speech and pronunciation struggles of your students, and you can use this knowledge to help them. You know how frustrating it can be when someone comments on your accent. You know how frustrating it can be when you are not easily understood. You know how, you may know, I know this one. My students bring this up to me all the time, but you probably know how frustrating it is when the first question someone asks when they meet you, maybe the second is, where are you from? I hear an accent. Where are you from? You know they're judging you. You don't know what the judgment is, but you know they've heard it. You know they've made this judgment. You know they've created a story in their head about you that could be correct or could be totally off. And that made me personally so self-conscious. I know it makes my students self-conscious. So you know this feeling. And because you know all this, it makes you an expert. Just that knowing, just those experiences that I described on this when this slide was up, that makes you an expert. That makes you able to uniquely support your students by sharing your experience with learning a language, realizing that you have an accent or dialect, changing that accent or dialect. You can help others improve. Sorry, I want to make sure I covered everything on that slide. I did. Now, I've said many times in the past 25 minutes that we have all this experience. We can support our students. We're uniquely qualified to do the work that we do, but it's our job to let other people know about all of this expertise that we are hiding in these brains of ours. And that's marketing. So let's talk about using your accent as a marketing tool. If you are a non-native speaker who is teaching accents and pronunciation, um, I wrote this, but anybody who has an accent, let's not limit this to non-native speakers. If you have not learned the general American accent or the standard American accent, I'm talking to you. And you can use your accent as a marketing tool. But the reason I bring up native speaker or non-native speakers of English is because I do believe that non-native speakers of English or English as a second language speakers do have, when it comes to marketing, they have a slight advantage over native speakers. Okay, so marketing for you is going to be along, in this arena. If you share your story, it's going to be a little bit more effective for you than it would be for me, because when you are marketing your services, you are your own success story. You've achieved the accent that you're teaching, and if you haven't, get in my practice libraries. Can I say that enough today? You are the walking talking advertisement for your services. And you don't need to, even if your accent isn't perfect, quote unquote perfect, even if you don't sound like a native speaker. Okay, those balloons just went off, and I have not figured out how to turn that off of my Zoom camera. So ignore any fun. I know this one too. This happens. Oh, I can make a heart. See that? Do you see that? Fun. Okay, but just ignore that. I don't mean for that to happen. I have not figured out how to turn that off, and I've tried many things. So if anyone knows, let me know. But side note, even if you don't sound like a native speaker, if you sound confident and easily understood when you're speaking English, you're showing your potential students a realistic example of what's possible. All right. You're in their situation and you've done it. You know how to speak English as a second language, which is most of our students, improve your spoken English, and with your help and time and practice, your students can sound just like you. So they can do what you have done. They can achieve what you have achieved with your guidance. Of course, you're the guide, right? We talk about that in the marketing program. You are the guide. They are the hero. They see your wisdom. They see how great you sound. They want to be like you, and you are uniquely qualified to help them. Think about that. And then you just tell your story, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I've seen this approach work for several teachers who are not native English speakers. It comes to my mind, one of the most successful YouTube channels out there related to accent and pronunciation is Hadar. Hadar. I think I'm saying her name wrong. Hadar. I think her name's Hadar. She's wonderful. She's engaging. She has millions of followers, I think millions, but hundreds of thousands. Anyway, you can look her up. Hadar Shamesh. She is not a native speaker of English, and she teaches the American accent. She changed her wording a little bit. She's now more of like an English approach, but it is the American accent in English. She's way more successful than me, than myself. And I'm a native speaker. She is not. So don't tell me that it can't be done as a non-native speaker. People are already out there doing it. There are several teachers in the program that are doing it. So don't use that as an excuse. I think the approach has to be a little bit different, but it definitely can be done. And one way to make it work for your advantage is to tell your story. I don't speak another language. And I'm actually, a lot of my students ask me, do you speak another language? And I have to tell them, no, I speak really poor, basic Italian and a tiny little bit of Arabic left over from my childhood when my grandparents spoke it to me. But it's gone. It's so gone. But by asking me if I speak another language, I know they're testing me. They know that people who speak more than one language tend to be, I don't want to say, well, okay, I think, in my opinion, and probably in their opinion too, are more intelligent and they understand the process of acquiring a language. And since I don't have that experience and I have not achieved second language mastery, I think they don't trust me. I've had students who, during the evaluation or only done a first session, and then they find out I don't speak another language, and I think they lose a bit of trust in me. So, and I get it. I totally get it. Or I shouldn't say that they lose trust in me, although they do. I think that, let's say it a different way. I am not the right speech expert for them because I don't speak another language fluently. So if I did, I would be telling the world about it. That would be a huge part of my marketing effort and my marketing strategy. So if you speak another language, I do recommend making it perfectly clear. Don't hide behind the fear that people won't want to work with you because you're not a native speaker. Okay. Yes, there are some people who will not want to work with you because you're not a native speaker. But there are people who don't want to work with us for a multitude of different reasons. And I think the best approach is to focus on the people that it's target market, the people who do want to work with us, the students that are perfect for us. Don't worry about the people who are going to say no to you anyway. They can hear in your speech, whether you're a native speaker or not. And if you have that quote unquote, what students will call perfect, their words, not mine, American accent, then you probably aren't having this issue anyway. So I think the best way to approach it is face it head on, make it really clear, be really honest about it. And I think it's a wonderful selling point for your specific target audience. If you can demonstrate that you speak English as a second language and now you're here and this is how you sound. You sound confident. And remember, you don't have to sound like a native speaker. You sound confident, you sound clear, and you're teaching the American accent. That's huge. That gives them so much motivation. You can demonstrate that you've been through what they are going through, that you understand where they're coming from, that you understand where they struggle with English pronunciation. Before you've even met them, if you can make this clear in your marketing materials and in your free content, you've already built a trusting relationship with them. You've already, your relationship that we talk about in marketing, that customer journey, that building that relationship with them as the hero and you as the guide to better speech, you're already so far along in that journey because they'll see the similarities in you. You're the perfect example of what's possible for them and how their lives will be better, right? You've gone through this and you are now teaching the American accent. That's how much better your life has gotten since you've started working. You can actually teach this accent that you've learned. That's a transformation. And that's exactly what marketing is all about. All right. So, lots of good stuff today. This is good. I'm thinking of some things that I might be talking about more in my marketing as well. Anyway, so we're going to start to wrap it up. When looking for an accent coach, I say this in the course too. Um, people are there are qualities of there are qualities that students are looking for in an accent instructor, and a lot of times they're not expertise is one of them, but it's only one. Your expertise in phonetics and linguistics and the sound placements and vocal improvement. Yes, they want that, but that's a small piece of the puzzle that they're looking for, or a small piece of the expertise, or a small piece of what they're looking for in a teacher, in an accent coach. So instead of worrying about, and they will look at your accent, right? They're going to hear how you sound. The way we speak is definitely a billboard for our services. So they're going to hear your accent or dialect if you have one, okay? But we already talked about the fact that you're going to be working on improving that. And instead of worrying about that so much, there are other areas where you can focus and improve to be a better overall teacher, because the way you speak is just a small part of it. It's not the whole picture. It's a very small part. So instead of worrying about your accent, I didn't like the way I said worrying. Let me do that again. Did anyone hear that? Worrying? I don't know what I did, but let's put more. What do I need to do? Worrying. I need to not speak so quickly, and I need to use more Y shadow between worry and ying. Worrying, 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 worrying. Yep, that's what I need to do to slow down. And here I am, a native speaker. We can all improve, right? Okay, let's try that sentence again. Instead of worrying about your accent, ooh, good NG there too, Jessica. Nice work. One more time. Instead of worrying about your accent, focus on continuing to improve your skills in these areas. Okay. Work on being more confident and being yourself. Students are looking for a personality. They're looking for a person and don't try to be like me or like someone you see on YouTube or like another teacher. They are looking for a personality that vibes with their personality. They're looking for a teaching style that appeals to them, right? I just went totally off topic in my notes and on a tangent about pronunciation. Some of you probably thought, oh my gosh, she's so funny and cool, and I like learning that way. And others of you probably thought, would you just shut up and get on with the presentation? Right. So I don't appeal to everyone, and neither will you, but we need to be ourselves, let our personalities show off. Because honestly, if you ask me what is the main, pick one reason, the biggest reason why you are successful. If someone said that to me, I would say, and I'm telling you the honest truth, my clients enjoy I'm great at conversations. I'm really good. My clients enjoy conversations with me. They like being with me because I am good at getting people to talk, and I'm a good listener. It's not about the speech pathology degree. It's not that I have a master's degree. It's not that I've been doing this for 25 years. It's not that I can speak with a perfect standard American accent of the 2000 of the early aughts. It's because they enjoy being with me. And that is the truth. So be yourself. Let your personality shine through in your marketing materials, but also in your sessions. Okay. Work on that. Show your expertise. Students do want an accent coach who's knowledgeable and who's experienced. That is important as well. But it's not the whole picture. And if you don't show off what you know, they will never see your expertise. So you should be showing off what you know in your free content, in your social media posts, in your YouTube videos, in your any free content. If you're not sharing good, useful, valuable knowledge, you're not showing off your expertise. And if you're not showing me that you're experienced, why would I want to work with you? And that's true of anyone in any field. So if you're self conscious about having an accent, work more on being an expert and showing more than that, showing off that expertise. Okay. Patience and empathy. And this one is totally underrated. But I said my students like to be with me, to have conversations with me, because I listen, and I think patience and empathy are part of being a good listener, because learning a new accent can be really challenging. It's a lot of repetition, and students get frustrated and they get down on themselves. So they appreciate a coach or an instructor who is patient, who's understanding, who's supportive, and who motivates them to keep going and keep practicing. Empathy also helps, and this is where coming from a language other than English can be really useful. That empathy of the frustration that you feel when speaking English can help you relate to the student's struggles, and you can work that into your sessions. Some of my students come to me for that aspect alone. We've talked about this in other lessons, the coaching confidence, making them feel that they do sound better than they think they do, that they sound good enough to ask that person out on a date or to ask their boss for a raise, whatever it is. But the patience and empathy and support piece of this is huge and bigger than the way you sound. I promise. Support, motivation, and encouragement. It's the same idea. Professionalism. Honestly, I think professionalism, I don't talk about this at all in any of my lessons or any of my programs because for me, it is so second nature. I am an anxious person, and it is very rare that if someone contacts me, and you all probably know this, by email or Facebook group or messenger or whatever it is, if it is more than 24 hours before I respond to you, I'm either on vacation, sick, or something bad has happened in my life. So for me, it's just second nature. So I never thought about this. And I'm sure it's second nature for many of you as well. But think about things like being professional, being reliable, being really dedicated to helping your students improve, being on time, punctuality. We started this webinar 1 minute late today, and I was starting to get I was starting to get have more anxiety. I was getting nervous and starting to sweat. I just needed to get a coffee, which probably isn't good for the anxiety, but punctuality is important. Responsiveness, I talked about that. I reply to my students and my it's 24 hours, and I think that is reasonable. Um, Confidentiality, that can be an issue. It depends. It depends. But think about those things. We do share a lot on social media. Make sure, or even, testimonials, make sure that you get permission to share things about your sessions in your marketing and with other students. That some people aren't aware of that at all. And that can be a deal breaker. It probably would be for me. Overall, what do you do that fosters a really professional relationship? And again, a lot of us think that that is second nature. There are a lot of really unprofessional people out there, or people who are unresponsive, or people that don't think it's important to reply to their emails and comments and messages. So you can excel in the area of professionalism and just demonstrate that in all of your dealings with potential students, current students, and past students. By past student, I mean if they're not seeing you actively, you should still be communicating with them with their permission via email. Demonstrate, find ways to demonstrate your commitment, your dedication, and your professionalism. Okay, I had more to say about this topic than I realized. So we might be talking about this a bit more in the future. But to sum it all up, with the right perspective, your accent or dialect can be a strength. It can connect you with your target audience. It can prove to them what's possible. If you've done it and you're now teaching others to do it, you're an expert, and they will believe that it's possible for them too. You are a walking, talking advertisement for your work. So demonstrate what you've done so far, keep it going, but continue to improve until you listen. We may not all reach the point of sounding like a native speaker in any chosen language that we didn't grow up speaking, but we can continue to try. And if you're teaching an accent, you should continue to train in that accent. Just like an athlete, you don't just stop going to the gym and expect to stay at the same level. You should, and that's professionalism, a dedication to continue to improve your own skills. And you have everything you need to do that. So go in those libraries and do it. Your accent can also create a supportive learning environment with a unique sense of empathy for your students. So, embracing your accent should not be a limitation, but you should use it as an opportunity to connect with your students on a deeper level. And I'm going to be honest, ChatGPT wrote this ending, what I'm reading right now, until the end of this. And I think it's so good. But just so you know, I did use ChatGPT to give me a little bit of structure for this presentation, but I changed a ton of it. So really, like, the structure is ChatGPT's, this ending is ChatGPT's, but the rest of it is all mine. But let me read what ChatGPT wrote, and I'm going to make you believe that it's me, okay? Embracing your accent is not a limitation, but an opportunity to connect with students on a deeper level. By understanding common concerns, addressing them proactively, and continuously improving your skills, that's important, you can be a highly effective accent instructor and inspire your students to achieve their speech goals. Do you see how I did that? Remember, I talk about this. If you haven't watched the updated, I think it's in the marketing section. I give you a tip and I use it all the time. This is something to share with your students too. When you're reading from a script, always look up at the end of a line and it makes it feel more real. And I'll demonstrate it for you now. This is kind of a tangent, but we're done with the main information for the presentation. So if you have to leave, you can leave. But look at the difference when I read that. I'll just take the first sentence. Embracing your accent is not a limitation, but an opportunity to connect with students on a deeper level. Okay, same sentence. Embracing your accent is not a limitation, but it's an opportunity to connect with students on a deeper level. Now, which one of those sounded more like I was actually saying it rather than reading it? Number two, right? The only difference, I looked up at the end of the line. I don't have that memorized. I'm not that good with memorization. I had to read the line. I got it in my head and then I delivered it to the camera. So that's a really good, I work on that with my students too, because people are on video, people do that's a good tip for presentation skills. Yeah, we can talk about that a little bit more in another session. That is all that I have today for the topic of teaching with an accent or dialect. I'd love to hear your thoughts, or if you have any questions, we can take a look at that now. Feel free to type your questions in the chat. Nope. Okay. Yes, you're welcome. I'm getting a lot of great info. Yeah, not to pat myself on the back, but this was good info. It was not something until I put it, all of these thoughts I have had at different times. And I think I mentioned all of this stuff at different points throughout the program, but I've never put it together in one presentation. And there's a lot to say, there's a lot to discuss. But I would love to hear more from those of you who speak English as a second language. I've got my experience with the regional dialect, so I feel I understand that experience. But if you are teaching the American accent and English is not your first language, I would love to hear more about your experience. So you can either send me an email, you can share that in the Facebook group. Maybe I'll even put a prompt in there to get you started. Or you can share your thoughts in the comment section below the replay of this video. Okay, I'd just love to get a perspective of how you feel and if this was helpful for you or if it just or not, whatever. Whatever. And add on to what I said. Any other tips that you can provide would be amazing. All right. So I think that's it for us today. We're coming up on an hour. If you need anything, you know where to find me. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you at the next live. See you soon.